All right, I got Thoryn Stephens on the show. He's a leading expert in neurotechnology, longevity, analytics, specializing in data architecture, consumer insights, behavioral analytics, system optimization. And he's also the founder of Brain One. This is a system, brain fitness platform that's going to start changing the way we think based on micro habits and different protocols. Thoryn, welcome to the show, brother.
Hi, Joel. Thank you so much. Happy to be
Man,
here.
I'm excited to dive into this with you because we were just talking offline about just how we are, where our brains are going 2025 with AI and everything, and just the dopamine rich environment. And we're going to need, we're going to need platforms like yours to help us come back in tune. I think, I don't want to say reality, but just with wanting to live a really fruitful and productive life and not feeling like we're drained from just our phones and everything that's going to start, I feel like, sucking a lot of our time. So I'm excited to jump into this. But yeah, give us some backstory, man. Like, you've had such you're so well versed in your backstory and what you do and how you got here as a molecular biologist to what you're doing now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So very much a researcher at my core. Began my career in biotechnology, working in small molecule drug development, specifically in molecular biology. So we were part of the generation that sequenced the human genome, and then the use of genetic data and really the gene expression model to understand, your DNA to your RNA to ultimately your full proteome, right? And then in between there, you have things like the epigenome and the transcriptome. But really understanding biology on a molecular basis. And I started doing Ironman distance training in my 20s, essentially. And that's when I really began to use different wearables to optimize my biology. So right now I'm wearing a Garmin. When these things came out, they were super chunky. Yesterday, I was wearing a Garmin with an Aura ring and an Apple Watch and a Whoop. And we were doing a time series analysis to see of these wearables, what is the most accurate. And it's really interesting. There's no standardization around some of these metrics like HRV per se, at least relative to the algorithms. But that was like really the impetus for using data to drive biology. And then, my background, again, I was in biotech for a number of years as a scientist. I then went into data science. And so the idea of using data to optimize behavior, and I had a very successful career there. And then 2 years ago, I was traveling and I was overseas, and I really just had this vision of really regrounding in my purpose of science. I was doing some private equity work, and it just really wasn't aligned with my greater purpose, to be honest. And so I really wanted to ground back into science, and I was doing some pro bono work with a group out of Columbia called Neurorights, and I saw this opportunity within Brain, and the idea that through mechanisms like neuroplasticity, the brain is very much a muscle, just like any other muscle in your body, and it can be strengthened and can be, optimized at the end of the day. And, we're not really taught a lot about the nervous system. We're taught very little about the brain, but we know how it impacts us every single day. And so that was the initial vision. And we started feeding essentially different research papers into our AI and building a database of human health protocols. And we have a 12-week program, and that's the kind of the core product of what Brain One is. But that's the idea of, again, really focusing on the brain as a muscle and brain fitness.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so you built Brain One obviously to optimize brain fitness. I guess, what does true cognitive training look like in 2025?
Sure.
And I guess, why do you think it's even more important than physical training?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't necessarily differentiate between cognition and physical per se. I mean, again, you need both. Like if you want to truly just have the baseline for an optimized brain, we talk about five major areas, right? So nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress. And then the fifth I would add is maybe like connection, to something or someone. It could be yourself, your family, higher power, it doesn't matter, but some level of purpose and connection. And so we think of it again as like it's a whole human. We don't just differentiate like, okay, you could just do brain training for your brain, and there's some great companies out there that do that. We think of that as an input in terms of what we're building, like Sudoku or Brain HQ, awesome methodologies. But again, that's just one component. However, if you don't have the baseline of sleep, as an example, you're not going to be neurologically active. So that's usually where we start, is like, what is the baseline? Nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, some level of connection. And then from there, we, optimize the health protocol based on the human. That's where I think when you look at a lot of these models, like the USDA food pyramid, how is it possible that we're recommending the same food pyramid to Americans that we did, like, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago? I mean, like, when was the last time that was updated? And they've been making some small updates. But, again, the biggest component of the food pyramid is like carbohydrates. And with, US obesity and diabetes at an all-time high, so it seems pretty ridiculous. And so we think about those pieces essentially. And then further around, the neurological optimization, then you can get into the really interesting things, right? And so thinking about brain measurement, very much a spectrum, over here, you have what was traditionally done relative to brain around assessments, right? And we differentiate the brain from the mind. The mind is actually separate relative to measurement. You can measure certain things in the brain like neurotransmitters, whereas, the mind and your mental health is technically separate. But generally where it starts are with cognitive assessments or clinical assessments, right? And I've done a bunch of research there. And so that's kind of one component of what we've built. And then you have a spectrum of brain measurement going all the way over here. And I would argue the most robust measurement of the brain are what are called brain-computer interfaces. And so these are literally chips that are on your neural tissue that measure the electrical activity in the different areas of your brain. And at Brain One, our chief brain futurist is a man named Dr. Galen Buckwalter. He has 6 neural implants right now. And it's an amazing story. I can tell you about it in a bit. But, so literally it's measuring, it's the highest resolution. And then in between, relative to brain measurement, you have, we're looking at things like biomarkers, which isn't measuring the brain activity directly, but it's measuring, the autonomic nervous system, and then specifically the parasympathetic. And what does that look like? So biometrics are a big piece. We also have biomarkers, and we're partnering with FDA approved, brain kits where you can do multiple blood biomarkers. And then you have EEG, QEEG, imaging, and so forth. So, when you talk about brain, it's very much a spectrum of measurement. And we try to meet people where they're at and offer simple, cost-effective solutions that people can follow, every day to basically help improve their cognition and mental capacity.
Yeah. Okay. That's a mouthful. So I want to right now, currently,
Sure.
with Brain One, where it is right now,
Yeah.
how would people get onboarded, and what process would they go up through that their 12-week program would be maybe different than mine? And
Yep.
then how do we start measuring those biomarkers? Is it like, hey, right now at the, minimum effective dose is, you're going to need this one kit or for
Yeah.
neurotransmitter measurement. And then there's going to be like on the other, like the platinum, which is like you
Yeah.
buy a Whoop, you buy this. So we send out a
Exactly.
remote EEG
Yep.
and we measure everything. And then in 12 weeks, we change your program after you've gone through that first one. Like, yeah.
Yeah. That's a great question. So, so the programs are adaptive. So ideally every week they're actually improving and getting better for you, Joel, ultimately. And it's dependent on what your inputs are. So, the basic area of the platform, again, we have the idea of assessments, and those are all based on CBT, of cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's where Galen's done decades of work on the AI side, but also around CBT and persona and, basically that whole component. And so that's kind of that's the basis of the platform. And then we have a series of micro habits that we recommend. And so again, very focused on the idea of like small incremental changes. And, as an example, sometimes we've been called the Noom of neuroscience, but the concept that you are, basically looking at the person and then recommending small things that they can do to improve their baseline health, but also, cognition. Quick point. So 60 to 70% of your gene expression is based on your environment, right? And so when we talk about the model of gene expression, over here you have DNA, RNA, and proteins. Very simply, we are an artifact of our proteome, or literally, quite literally, proteins, enzymes, and so forth. In between, you have what's called the epigenome. You've heard about epigenetics. It's kind of everywhere. That's what I learned on the front lines, of being a molecular biologist, was like, oh, we sequence the human genome. And like, there's so much that happens post genome, again, RNA, transcriptome, and then epigenome, all the way to the actual proteins of what make us an actual human. But what is fascinating is 60 to 70% of your gene expression can be dependent on the environment. And so as an example, for Brain One, what we've done is there's a study out there called the Lancet 2020. And this has, if you ever heard the hypothesis that dementia is preventable, Joel,
Yeah.
right? It's kind of, and so, all your readers can Google this paper right now. It's the Lancet 2020 dementia. It'll come up. And what it outlines are 12 modifiable behavioral, essentially risk factors, but also changes you can make, in your day to day. And so what are examples? So environment is literally everything at the end of the day. And so one is connection, and so as we talk about kind of our non-negotiable, like core premise of Brain One, connection is an integral part of that. People that are connected to something, it could be to honestly your higher power, it could be to yourself, it could be to a higher power if you're religious or not. It could be to your family and friends and so forth. But people that have connection generally live, I think, at 10 to 12 years longer at the end of the day. So connection is a big thing. Social interactions are actually another one as well. How social are you? You don't need to be overly social, but people who are like locked in an old folks home and don't have a lot of sociability, generally progress into some of these diseases quicker at the end of the day. And then you layer in things like, exercise and, nutrition and sleep and so forth. So the Lancet 2020 outlines 12, again, modifiable risk factors. And what we do is we take that, we run it through AI, we generate editorials, educational content, and then literally a protocol someone can come and utilize. And it just outlines these 12 things. They progress over time, try to get them to really understand the basic, baseline of health. And some things you can change, some things you can't, but many of them you can. An example of something you can is if you live in a big city and maybe you have, your air quality is not quite as high. So, certain things you can't, but there's still a handful of things we can do, again, around our behavior to improve our health and especially our brain health.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about those brain boosting micro habits? Because I
Yep.
think, a lot of people would say, no way could these micro protocols that you're talking about are going to really make that much of a like really going to make some real change here. But
Sure.
that's what this whole 12 weeks is about.
I mean, that's it.
And you're seeing
Yeah.
the results.
You can measure the results. That's what we're working towards. We are doing research studies. Again, I'm a researcher at my core. And so we're trying to validate, again, studies such as the Lancet 2020, though, to be clear, is actually very well published. It's very well cited. It's not all dementia cases, but they say 30 to 40 of the, 55 million dementia cases worldwide, right? And similar with Alzheimer's, you can have a genetic predisposition, but, again, you can start to slow essentially the onset of the amyloid proteins, the tau proteins that really progress the disease. So that's what we're really thinking about. Relative to the microhabits, we have a database. We actually have 2,000 microhabits in the database right now. And so I wouldn't say it's like any one thing. You can't just be like, only do brain training and you're going to be fine. It's not the case. Again, it's incremental change across the whole human. And so one example, which is very pertinent in our culture, is the idea of single tasking versus multitasking. We believe in this hustle grind society that we can do 5 things at once. I'm doing a podcast, I've got my phone, there's a monitor on the background. All of these things are taking away ultimately our attention, and how focused we are in the moment, Joel. If you have 4 things to do and you have 1 hour to get them done, if you're going to try to do all 4 things at the same time for the whole hour, you're going to be less neurologically productive than ultimately, focusing on like one of the things, as an example. So that would be one. The power of connection would be another micro habit. So especially as you're getting older, and it could be just, meeting a weekly group and doing a book club or playing cards or, like banana bingo, like whatever it is. My grandma, that was her favorite, right? Banana bingo. But whatever it is, like getting and being social, like people who are not social ultimately have like lower life expectancies, at the end of the day. And then just your environment, for me personally, like I live in Colorado, I am outside every single day with lots of sunscreen, but that's like my core, a core component of what I do living here. I did a 10K trail run on Sunday up and over mountains, with one of our Brain One, one of the team members. And this are just the things that we do every day. This is just kind of our normal everyday life. And so, but it's meeting the human wherever they're at in the world and making recommendations, that are truly personalized to them. So Joel, being in Idaho, might get a different protocol than someone living in New York City who only has access to, Central Park, as an example.
Right. I guess I was wondering too, when it comes to these micro habits, like how long does it take to actually have you guys seen to actually rewire the brain? Because I think that's what people say. No way is 60 seconds, going to really rewire my brain. But it seems like you guys have some data to say, actually,
we're gathering data there. I mean, what I would say is what you can do in a 12-week program is you can change your behavior. like using CBT. That's pretty well documented. And where we're going within Brain One is the idea that you can actually change specific neurotransmitters. And so, or, specific, there's a ton of other, blood markers that we look at. And so depending on the human and where they're at, if they can afford it, we try to really, try to make the platform as accessible as possible. Really, the expenses in the different, what we call outcome measures, or the different diagnostics. And so we have a test that we've partnered with, where you can do a pre and a post, and you do essentially 6 blood biomarker panel, and then you do a series of cognition tests, so looking at executive function, memory, processing speed, attention. And then you do 6 blood biomarkers. And so these are things like it's omega-3, omega-6, the omega-3-6 ratio, the palmitic acid, AA-EPA ratio, things of that nature. And this is FDA approved. And so we're just gaining data to see if we can, ultimately positively move, these different biomarkers in the brain. But it looks very, very interesting. And we know wholeheartedly, again, just laying that foundation within three months, 12 weeks, we can absolutely change human behavior. Can we move the needle on biomarkers? We're seeing, I can tell you, we can definitely move the needle on biometrics, HRV.
Yeah.
You can improve HRV based on the things that you do, period. I mean, I do it all the time, so around those behavior modifications. So it's quite interesting. And, we're gaining a lot of data here, and ultimately the goal is to publish, and, we're really a research team at our core.
It'd be really interesting too. What you're saying is, can we change blood biomarkers like omega-3, omega-6 to 3 ratio just off of our micro habits, which may not even be related to our diet? That would be pretty fascinating, man. If you guys had some data on that, that'd be really cool.
What we're testing is supplementation. Again, there's such, as I mean, supplements are the Wild West. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. I go through phases where I'll do 20 and then I'll do none, except for, like very basic, like maybe omega-3s or something. But there's just not a lot of, data around this. And that's one of the things we're trying to demonstrate relative to the recommendations we make, but also the measurement. And so if you take a good fish oil supplement, can you improve, your omega-3 ratio? That's one of the questions that we're working on.
Since you guys have built really one of the world's largest brain boosting micro habit database, what do you think is the silent killer in terms of cognitive health that most people do every single day?
So again, sleep, like non-negotiable. I mean, if you're not getting the right amount of sleep, you will not be neurologically active, period. We can do, you can do all the, nootropics and supplements that you want to help boost your brain. If you are not getting like minimum 6 hours of sleep, which is tough. I mean, I usually get 5.5. Last night I got 10. It just depends. But sleep is absolutely one of those non-negotiables. For me, it's also exercise. I'm a very vigorous human relative to, my athletics. It's all for fun. I do triathlons. We have a Brain One team that's going to be racing Malibu. Side note, Joel, if you want to join in September,
I'll see you there. Yeah, I'm ready.
Welcome to join the team. We had about 10 athletes that did our first race, but
that's impressive, man.
Yeah, it's all for fun though. It's just getting out. Dude, my mother's done more Ironmans than me, like period.
Wow.
So, but it's all for fun, but it's also this overarching, again, passion and commitment to health. And so when we talk about exercise, like level 2, 3, essentially in, activity is what we're looking for. This is the same as Peter Attia's protocols. You're familiar with Peter Attia, longevity expert, MD, awesome human. So what we did was analyze Huberman. We analyzed Peter Attia's protocols. We analyzed, just a number of other longevity experts that were out there and just ran them through the AI. And that's like kind of how we're starting to frame, again, these protocols, based on the person. And there's a lot of these parallels, between all of them too.
Yeah. I was just thinking too, it'd be interesting with Brain One. And I think, we're pretty close to there, where you could also, it'd be interesting with having like some type of wearable where, you can actually change certain habits because you are using this CPT. We're using this cognitive behavioral, model.
Sure.
It'd be really interesting if you'd be able to, send people reminders or nudges so that they can actually change some of their micro habits instantly. How close do you think we are to that? Like
Oh yeah, that's what we're testing right now, quite literally. Yeah, the whole nudging side of this is really critical.
Or
Um,
like my heart rate goes up, right? Because I get pissed off at my wife. I get in an argument. But one of the
sure.
things I'm working on
Right.
is being more patient. And like, this is part of the thing I'm actually working on.
Yeah.
It senses, your blood pressure is rising or something. And it's like, wait a second,
Yeah.
it changes me and it says, wait, wait, wait. That's not who you
Right.
want to be. That's not how you want to show up. And then if I can do that enough times, I can start to rewire. And to me, that would be fascinating.
100%. And like two examples, right? So your blood pressure goes up, you're dealing with X, Y, or Z. What are two things you can do for free right now? Well, one is a cold plunge, and you can do that in your shower if you don't own a cold plunge. I do them in the rivers, pretty regularly here in Colorado. I mean, it's freaking cold right now with the snow melting. That's something you can do to, again, help manage your autonomic nervous system right now today. You don't need to buy anything. You can do it right now in your home in the shower. And doing a 2-minute session, that would be one. Another one, Joel, could be just breath work.
Yeah.
Focusing on your breath, doing box breathing. These are all things, again, like Huberman evangelizes, like no cost immediate tools you can do as part of your toolkit. So if something happens, you don't maybe take another action. These are all like great examples of behavioral modifications.
Yeah, and I don't know about you. I've never any problem I had in the world. I don't care how angry you are. If you get in a cold plunge, you cannot be angry at anyone at that moment because all you're doing is trying to breathe and stay alive.
As long as it's cold enough,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I'll
yeah,
tell you, if it's cold enough, yeah, you're not, you're just breathing, and
yeah.
that's what it forces you to do. And then it's also has these other physiological benefits, relative to recovery and all these things. So yes, 100%. And again, these are the types of tools and that are really the foundation of what we've been building and evangelizing.
Yeah, because you have so much data too. Obviously, we know, and you talked about that Lancet article and how neuroplasticity is linked also to longevity, right?
100%.
What do you think are, if you had to distill down? And I know you mentioned there's those 5, and then in the Lancet I think there's 12. But what do you think are like the top 3 ROI habits that really everyone should be doing today?
Yeah, I mean, not to sound redundant, but sleep, absolutely
Yeah,
critical. I would get a wearable immediately. So right now I'm wearing the Garmin. I also wear the Aura when I sleep. And again, I also have a Whoop and then an Apple Watch. They're all different. They all have different algorithms, but measuring your sleep allows you to then optimize it. And if you've never used a sleep tracker, it's game changing. So that's
what
absolutely
would you do,
critical.
right? What have you noticed for your own data, at least that you can speak personally, that's been the biggest game changer in terms of optimizing sleep?
Yeah. So it's very small things like when you eat, the time, intermittent, you don't have to go full intermittent fasting, but like the time of the day that you eat regularly, and then the time of the day that you go to bed. So if you're eating at 8 and you're going to bed at 9, your like body is full of that food and it's literally digesting, and it could impact your HRV by decreasing it, period. So the time, and again, and then just getting into your what's called the chronotype, but when you go to bed and relative to the sunlight that you're getting in the morning, like absolutely critical. But yeah, that would be one specific, is just around the timing, the time you go to bed, the time you eat, when you get up in the morning, and how much direct sunlight you're getting. I mean, these are all things you can do for free right now.
Yeah, true. I think my biggest one, if I that's easy from, well, 2 actually I would say, is optimizing blue light has
Yeah.
been a big one for me, and
Awesome.
then also just staying consistent, like you said. If my schedule is the
Yep.
same and I get to bed at the same time at the same, you know what? I tend to have more consistent numbers.
100%. And literally that's, so whether you use a tracker or not, I mean, you can do this all with a piece of paper. It doesn't matter what you use ultimately to track, but it's just having that consistency, and that's everything. And that's why when you're traveling, everything goes haywire relative to your routine. But something we also work with are, humans, athletes, and we have them develop travel protocols essentially. So if you're on the road, you can't do, when I'm here in Colorado, I go to hot Pilates 3 days a week or, whatever. But instead I do, 150 push-ups, while I'm on the road for whatever X number of days, things like that. But having a structured framework, we found people generally do better, at the end of the day. Not everyone. And to your prior point around the notifications and stuff, we don't want to be creepy, like in general, like, hey, Joel, looks like you're a little heated. Do you want to do some breath work? Like, I don't know. Is that invasive? I mean, at some point it
Well,
maybe.
I don't. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, it's a really good point because nobody. We live in this world where Alexa's listening to us. Everybody's listening to us, but I don't know. I mean, if I'm consenting that I want this
Right.
kind of feedback in real
Yes,
time for
that's
this
it.
3-month protocol, I don't know. Maybe it would be
Yeah.
helpful. But yeah, good point.
Exactly. And it depends on the motivation of the human. Everyone's different. Some people more advanced, they like the notifications. Some people want none. What we've also seen in our protocols is that people will print them out and actually do a non-digital, essentially checklist, and then send us a photo and we can upload it and track, that way if that's interesting to them. So it's, again, really meeting people with where they're at. It doesn't need to be entirely digital at the end of the day. And really the most important thing is you do what you committed to doing, the beginning of the program protocol, whatever your objectives are.
Right now, what are people coming to Brain One for mostly? Or is it really that, is it because we started off with talking about dementia,
Sure.
but I'm 43 and I eat pretty healthy and I am around connection and humans and I'm doing fine. I'm not actually even worried about, to be honest, I'm not even worried about dementia. And I don't know if a lot of 43-year-olds my age, unless they have a history of it, are
Right.
worried about it at all. What do you find most people are really looking for in terms of upgrading their performance because they know that by
Yeah.
going through this 3 months,
Right.
they're going to benefit in a different way? What have you noticed?
So I would say there are like 5 to 6 major indications people are looking for. So brain is where we started, and actually focusing again on brain, fitness and health as opposed to just neurodegeneration. But, so focusing on brain was one. Sleep, gut, stress, recovery, really. So sleep, gut, stress, recovery, brain, those are really the 5 major areas. And there's things you can do for each of those relative to micro habits,
So
as well as
people are coming, sorry to cut you off. So people are coming to you, Thorne, for gut health?
yeah, we have a partnership with a group out of LA. They're called Sports IQ. And we are absolutely working on, we have a white label with them, and people are going to Brian and they're now using Brain One to help support their overall health, including gut, 100%. And obviously
Wow.
there's a massive connection between the gut and the brain. So,
Yeah.
these pieces all really come full circle. Other areas, side note, Brain One is really just a platform at its core. And so women's health has come up from day one. And we're starting to develop protocols for women specific to things like perimenopause and menopause and endocrine disruption. And, why does every woman in my life have a thyroid issue? Literally, some sort of autoimmune issue. And so these are other areas that we're now starting to think about and focus on, but, really started with brain, and it's just opened up, this whole new avenue that we're, looking at essentially.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize that. That's amazing. People are coming for gut health. What were the, you said sleep was probably number one,
Yep.
gut
So
health and
sleep.
physical training. Yeah. I could see trying to create new habits to
Yep.
be in better shape. That makes sense.
Stress, again,
Yeah.
I mean, of course, like, and again, we're not a medical device. We're not trying to cure anxiety, but again, if you look at the whole human, we definitely have protocols and then different modalities you could do to help improve stress. And that's something, that we see that's also measurable, relative to things like HRV as a metric.
My biggest one would be distraction. And we were talking about this offline, right?
Sure.
This cell phone right here is the
Yeah.
biggest dopamine sucker ever. Are you guys, do you have protocols driven for people like me that find themselves distracted, but they want to reclaim that agency in their life so they can show up and be a better dad, be a better
Yeah.
husband, and be a better high performer?
100%. Something that we're seeing that's like very sad for the younger generation, for the 20-year-olds and younger, is what's called bed rotting. And so we have have you heard of this? Yeah,
No,
just
no.
Google it. I mean, it's a form of doom scrolling, but it's these younger kids that are literally sitting in bed and just scrolling, and they're, depressed, I'm sure, at some level, and they are seeing lives that they're not living and they're not where they want to be. And it's actually an epidemic. I think it's
Yeah.
going to continue because of the dopamine and exactly what you're talking about. So we have built protocols around that. And again, what's the measurement? Well, we're also hyper focused in how do you measure these things? And so looking at your weekly screen time, your daily weekly screen time, is an indication, exactly of this. And so there's ways you can measure these things, that we are building into the system. That one's not in yet. But as an example, looking at screen time, how much time are you spending? And it can't just be on your phone if you're using a laptop, but looking at all your devices. And there are, and so from that perspective, these are things we can optimize. We should be optimizing with our friends, like who has the lowest amount of screen time in the group. Like, how cool would that be? So that's how we're generally thinking about it.
That's awesome. Let me know when that program comes out. I need to sign up.
I mean, for sure, we'd be happy to share it with you. And it's, it's really quite sad. So thinking about, how can we help drive positive change through micro habits and behaviors, especially for the kids. And actually, to your other point too, you're young, we're about the same age, but you lay the foundation now in your 30s and 40s then you're going to, have a very strong springboard when you're in your 60s and 70s. You don't want to be in your 70s and be dealing with dementia. All of our parents are terrified of this right now. I can pretty much guarantee it. I talk to humans across the globe, and again, with this type of framework, people can be just following his general life principles. Ultimately, it will lay that, strong, positive foundation for you.
Yeah. Can you also just talk about, some of the things we were talking about, for people that are unaware of like how the interface, the platform works?
Sure.
Obviously, you're getting a personalized plan that's going to work for you, asking whether it's certain check-ins and creating certain micro habits. But also, we were talking about some of the physical things like breath work, and we were talking about binaural beats.
Sure.
And you just mentioned to me some of these great partnerships you're doing when it comes to supplementation, right? That's
Yep.
going to be huge. Talk to us just a little bit about that, as well as like, what are some of the partnerships that you're seeing or you already have, so
Yeah.
that when people do come to Brain One, they really get this holistic approach.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so we have these core baseline protocols, and then we are partnering with some of the best, different wearable devices or supplements in the game. As an example, a very close friend is the Apollo Neuro team. So Dr. Dave Raven and his wife are doing amazing, amazing work, and they are focused on the idea of using a wearable to modulate the parasympathetic, essentially through vibrational touch. And we have a great partnership with them. We also work with wearable devices like Aura. Ion is that's essentially it's a gut optimized supplement.
With
Um,
Dr. Zach Bush's company. Is that
that's
what you're talking
Dr.
about?
Zach Bush. Yeah,
Oh,
this is actually
awesome.
a good
Amazing.
friend. Yeah, Ion's doing great work. It's the fulvic humic type of blend, that are in a lot of our protocols as a side note. So that would be someone we would recommend. And so, yeah, so basically just take a step back. You go through Brain One, you do an assessment. And the question is, do you want to do a 12-week program or just a one-off protocol? And we're really focused on the idea of the program. Sign up for the program, and then we give you a baseline, essentially protocol that you follow that starts with 12 weeks. And it also depends on your experience level, complexity. Like most humans can really only start with like 2 behavioral modifications a week, 1 or
Yeah.
2 max, Joel. Even doing that can be challenging. It just depends.
Mhm.
But it also depends on their commitment and their motivation. Some people, do really well. Some people fall off. It just depends, ultimately. But we want to give them the right amount of complexity and then the right, amount of notifications without being annoying, and protecting their privacy, of course, which is paramount to all of these things. And as a data scientist, it's something I'm very sensitive to.
I love that you are. Question, actually, you just brought up something for me. I have kids.
Yeah,
I would love to, one of the things my wife and I are always yelling at the kids and, do this and do that. And we're trying to build. And I realize what you just said every week in our family meetings. It's like,
that's
well,
awesome.
you didn't get done
Yeah,
what you're supposed to do. What came up for you? Right. And
sure.
you're right. There's only so much that these kiddos can take on, but I also know, and I try to keep the framework that it's the power of repetition, and it's just that's part of them.
Consistency.
That's part of
Yeah,
them learning. But
sure.
have you seen anything cool with kids, or is this something And again, that can be sensitive because we're talking about privacy. But have you tried it with your own, or do you anything in that world? Yeah,
Not yet. We definitely have had interest from parents. So we're trying to stay focused in brain and
it makes sense. Yeah,
these
don't.
other
Yeah,
verticals. So kids are definitely something that we're very conscious of, and there's a lot of impact and input from our advisory board and our practitioners, and it's definitely something we're thinking about, but we haven't built anything just yet.
yeah. And I would just take my own medicine as I'm talking to you. How do you get kids to change? We'll start modeling the behavior. So maybe
Yeah.
you're not creating the
Well,
the
exactly.
standard. And so maybe you should go through Brain One, Joel, and your
Yeah.
wife should, and then see what happens in 3 months with your
That's a great
family.
point.
That's yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
great.
I mean, another quick side note too, relative to like families and households, pet protocols. We get hit up all the time for pets, and so that's also something that's on the roadmap. But people care more about their pets than themselves. And so, what
That's
does that
true.
look like in terms of keeping your household, your family, as well as your pets healthy? And these are all things that we're thinking about, but progressing, very strongly here. Once we get additional data and research, we'll continue to look at these other
Yeah,
different
yeah.
areas.
Amazing stuff. I want to wrap things up here in a little bit. I know we both have to run, but I wanted
Um,
to ask you, what are some new and exciting partnerships that are, or are you allowed to kind of talk about anything that's new and exciting, whether it's partnerships or just
yep.
where you see Brain One and, by the end of the year of 2025 or anything you can talk about?
Yeah, there are a few. We are razor focused in modalities that people can do anywhere in the world. So accessibility is really important, and that it's free. A lot of these things, again, if you can't afford a cold plunge, go in your shower or the river. So that's just something in general that we're thinking about, and also maybe non-blood based diagnostics. So looking at things like facial recognition or hypertension. A lot of these things you can now get through your phone. So you don't need to go to a doctor and give blood. You can actually do it through voice or your mobile device. So kind of in general, relative to the inputs, that's what we're thinking about. And I've done some pretty crazy testing recently where my blood work has been the same as doing like a essentially like a scan on my brain and things like that.
Wow.
And that just opens up the accessibility. So again, things people can do at home. So that's just in general a big trend. But then over here, we have like the clinical trial Dr. Galen is doing with Caltech, where he's, literally he has 6 neural implants, and we'll go to Caltech, and they're screwing on interfaces, and they're actually connecting his brain to the internet. That's the most advanced form of measurement. He's a quadriplegic, and so this is an opportunity for him to use his science and research for the greater good. But quite literally, he's being connected. His brain activity is being connected to the broader internet and so forth. So
Wow.
that's also very interesting. Kind of in between there, though, you have things that are like what are called non-invasive BCIs, so brain-computer interfaces, but that don't require drilling a hole in your head. Neuralink's probably the most well-known relative to BCIs, but you have non-invasive, and that's also where the technology is going. The resolution is not as high relative to the measurement. A QEEG versus an EEG. But again, it's getting better and better ultimately, and so some really cool research that's happening on that, those spaces as well. So those are some of the things that we're actively thinking about, and I find it it's a very exciting time to be alive, and we are really trying to make the technology help support the better humanity.
Yeah, very cool stuff, man. Thoryn Stephens from Brain One. Appreciate you, man. I mean, you guys
Thank
are
you,
doing
Phil.
some really cool stuff. Well, last but not least, where can people, if they want to learn more about Brain One, where can they connect with you guys? Where can they learn more, whether it's on social media, Instagram or something like that, or just the
Yep.
website? Where should they go?
Yeah, they can go to brain.one, and then they can go through the assessment and join the wait list. If they mention your name, we're happy to put them to the front, Joel. And we're on Instagram, Brain Fitness One, and also have a podcast under the same name where we're interviewing amazing humans and athletes, and really putting these types of micro habits to the forefront.
That's amazing. I love that. I love it. Thoryn Stephens, Brain
Cool.
One. Thanks for being on the show, brother.
Thanks,
Appreciate you.
Phil. Appreciate it.